All right, if you've been listening to this show for more than a day, you already know I'm unabashedly patriotic. I mean, I believe in standing for the flag, rallying to the cause, supporting the Constitution, speaking my mind. All of which, by the way, are not unknown in other places, but they are absolute rights in America. They are. I mean, think about it. What other country in the world not only allows freedom, but actually enshrines it as the basis for who we are as a nation, as a people? And I believe the left can't stand America as it really is. The progressive left is constantly and overtly decrying anything that shares the values, traditions, and freedoms of America as an absolute. We are a nation of rough and ready, a nation of faith, and largely Christian faith at that. A nation that smirks at tyrants and faces down bullies. But the left has done all that it can over the last decade, and especially the last 4 years, to actually tear away the fabric of America and just leave the bones. The left will kneel at the anthem, burn the flag, degrade the military readiness, and steal our tax dollars, downgrade families, and mock our faith. But I believe, really do, I believe that we are seeing the soul of America on the rise again. There is, in my opinion right now, a revival of Christianity, a restoration of traditional values, a resurgence of patriotism. I mean, you can feel it. It's real. So today, I'm going to push the outer limits a bit. I'm going to suggest that nobody should ever underestimate the American people. Because the American spirit is a thing. It's a real thing. I mean, the American spirit is almost tangible. And I'm going to talk about it today. But to do that, I'm going to go into parable mode. I'm going to use two modern day movie classics as the backdrop for where we've been and where we're going. Two movies that I think clearly and unequivocally embody who we are and why conservatives are so adamant about regaining and restoring the America that we love. Those two movies, Red Dawn and Ford versus Ferrari. All right, so one of those movies is the analogy in my mind for what it's been like as a conservative over the last several years. We've been fighting, resisting, and determined to maintain what we know and love against an absolute onslaught of liberal progressive ideology, lawfare, corruption, big government overreach, censorship. That's Red Dawn. The other one talks about the American spirit having been denigrated, mocked, and scorned, and then rising up and kicking the opposition right in the teeth and showing the world what America can do and why you should never count us out. So yeah, buckle up, because this one is going to be meat and potatoes. When I get done talking, you're going to be ready to go hunt bear with a switch. All right, so I don't know about you, but I'm a child of the 80s, and that means that there are certain things that just become like generational icons in my mind. I mean, the 80s for me were Ronald Reagan and Pac-Man and seeing Van Halen live in 81. It was big hair and big bands, man. It was cruising southeast Huntsville, Alabama in my 68 Mustang with Journey's Escape album playing on a near endless loop on cassette. The 80s were hanging out at the mall when I wasn't working at the mall. It was high school football games, it was prom dates, it was hating algebra. The 80s were just cool. And the 80s also, by the way, were the era of growth and pride in who we were as a nation. We were coming up out of the Carter era. Things were already feeling different. The man in the 80s White House was a real leader who really led. And the movies of the day back in the 80s were things that we could really get into. They were things like Top Gun, Iron Eagle, First Blood, Uncommon Valor, An Officer and a Gentleman, and perhaps the galvanizing classic of a whole generation, the movie that every high school guy wanted to be a part of, drum roll please, Red Dawn. So I went to basic training as a cadet to earn my commission in 1985, Fort Knox, Kentucky. It was my first foray into anything military. So I plussed up, I got in shape and did other things to prepare myself. And one of the things I also did was I watched Red Dawn. I mean, that movie had everything. Red Dawn, the movie, it was like red, white, and blue, hard-pressed, overcoming odds, courage under fire, stare down your enemies, America. It just was. So Red Dawn, the movie, premiered on August 10th, 1984. It stars like Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey, Charlie Sheen, C. Thomas Howell, Leah Thompson, Powers Booth, and a host of teen stars from the day played high school students from a small Colorado town where the Soviets invaded the U.S. and those kids took to the hills. They had no idea what to do, but they knew how to survive. And along the way, those kids, the stars of the movie, kind of accidentally became guerrilla fighters. They began terrorizing the Soviet occupiers, raiding supplies, I mean, it was like Robin Hood, Green Berets, and the cast of The Breakfast Club all wrapped up in one fell swoop. And everything they did in the movie, everything in the storyline, every Russian vehicle they blew up, every raid, every whatever they did to the bad guys, they painted the name of their high school mascot on it, Wolverines. And there was one adult who wound up joining them. There was a fighter pilot named Lieutenant Colonel Andy Tanner in the movie, played by Powers Booth. He was shot down, and he was found by the Wolverines. He was asked by one of the kids how he got shot down. He said, "It was 5-1. I got 4." At one point, too, Colonel Tanner was describing the big picture of the war that they had not been able to see because they'd been so isolated, so trapped behind enemy lines. He told them about nuclear strikes that took out D.C. and other major cities. He told them about Soviet paratroopers who came in and jumped into the Rockies, and he said, and I quote this, he said, "Infiltrators came up illegal from Mexico, Cubans mostly." That sounds familiar. They managed to infiltrate SAC bases in the Midwest, several down in Texas. They wreaked a hell of a lot of havoc, he said, "I'm here to tell you." They opened up the door down here, the southern border, and the whole Cuban, Nicaraguan, and Latin American armies just came walking right through, just rolled right up here through the Great Plains. He said, "We held them at the Rockies and the Mississippi River." And the Russians reinforced. They sent 3 whole army groups, he said, across the Bering Strait into Alaska, cut the pipeline, came down across Canada to link up here in the middle. He said, "But we stopped their butts cold here." Y'all, I'll be honest with you. The very first time I heard that description in the movie, it was still chilling. It was describing places that I knew. It was describing places that were places that I loved, where I had friends and family that lived and walked and served. I had never thought about what it would be like to have an occupying army invade my country. In the movie, it turned into a stalemate war. It was fighters behind the lines like the Wolverines that were giving hope to the free Americans, and they became an inspiration as they not only held out, but they also fought back. So why did we love that movie so much? I mean, think about it. Why did it become an instant hit and an enduring classic? I mean, I think partly it was because it felt somewhat real, like I said. In the real world at the time, there was still an enemy that hated us. There was always a threat of the Soviet bear on the horizon. The Cold War was in its final years, but it was still going, and America was in a resurgence on the world stage. But it also, Red Dawn, felt like something that we would want to know would be handled the way the movie portrayed it. That good folks who lived normal lives would actually rise up and do abnormal things if the times called for it. And to be honest, every kid in America, me included, pictured themselves as a Wolverine. I mean, the movie was also made, if you think about it, less than a decade after the fall of Saigon, just a few years after the Iran hostage saga. American pride on the world stage had been wounded in the years just prior to Red Dawn coming out. Red Dawn was described by Time magazine as a pop cultural inoculation against the Vietnam syndrome of self-doubt about the morality of U.S. foreign policy. All right. I don't know about all that. That's highbrow talk for basically saying it struck a much-needed chord. And Red Dawn, it actually became an instant classic, even among members of the military. Years later, in 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, the mission to capture Saddam Hussein was actually codenamed Operation Red Dawn, with the target where they actually caught him labeled as Wolverine 1. An Army captain by the name of Jeffrey McMurray is apparently the one who chose the name. He was asked about it later. He said, "Well, I think all of us in the military have seen Red Dawn." So yeah, I realized recently when I was thinking through all this that we had just passed the 40th anniversary of Red Dawn, the movie, coming out. The director, John Milius, he was one of the few openly conservative filmmakers in Hollywood. He wanted a movie that showcased patriotism and a love for the American military, and a movie, by the way, that also warned about giving up our liberties like speech and the right to bear arms. So his daughter, Amanda Milius, she recently told Fox News that Hollywood really didn't like his movie when it came out. In the Fox interview, she was asked why the film has resonated for more than a generation. She said that one line from the movie where Swayze's character was speaking sums up why the movie's characters so desperately tried to defend America against steep odds and why the movie itself was successful. Swayze, who played a young leader named Jed, was asked why they fight. His answer was pretty simple. He said, "Because we live here." That scene, in Amanda Milius' words, was basically, in her words, quote, "We have to do this," she said. "We have to take care of the country. This is our responsibility." It's like this very American idea of I'm going to go, and I just know in my bones that if somebody were to invade my land, she said, I would go and protect it in whatever way I could with my high school friends in a truck if I had to. Well, the film was an instant hit. It made waves. It drew the attention of patriots everywhere. Like even politicians. Former Reagan Secretary of State Al Haig, he said the movie captures the stresses of patriotism, the emotions of war. The emotions of love, and above all, the futility of war. But Hollywood didn't go for it. Director John Milius, he was pretty much blackballed after that. Told that his work was too political. He needed to calm it down a notch. Movie critic Roger Ebert, he even blasted it, saying the movie was, quote, corrupt from beginning to end with a right-wing ideology that the picture doesn't deserve. What an asinine thing to say. The National Coalition on Television Violence, they decried it as the most violent movie ever made. I guess they hadn't seen, Friday the 13th or Halloween at that point. Had an average of 134 acts of violence in 1 hour, they said. Okay, well, it was about war, so yeah. But here's the thing. It was supposed to be right-wing. It was about patriotism. It was about liberty. It was about defending that which is ours from those that would dare to try and take it, and we loved it. Red Dawn, just over 40 years ago, a classic, an American classic, a movie for a generation that really made you feel like we might take a lick, but we'll give back double. I say make more like that. But I would also say, too, that this is what the culture war has felt like for the past several years in real life here in America. I mean, think about it. How disheartening has it been over the last few years for us to watch the mess forced on us by COVID, the riots of BLM, and to watch as political figures did nothing and even bowed down in so-called solidarity with angry race baiters who told us that we were systemically racist as a people. Even Pelosi and Schumer leading members of Congress to kneel down in our nation's Capitol rotunda. Do you remember that? How about DEI ruining the idea of meritocracy? Free market capitalism being forced to give way to big government, like, forcing electric vehicles down our throats. That's not the way the free market works. Transgender ideologies in schools, men playing girls' sports, the military being downgraded in readiness, the southern border falling apart, the debacle in Afghanistan, 40-year inflation, epic national debt, loss of our energy dependence. I could go on, but you get the picture. You were there. You lived it, and we fought it. And we survived behind enemy lines in the culture wars. And now comes the rebuilding. So, let me go to movie number 2. Red Dawn, absolutely classic, absolutely important. I think it's a great analogy for where we've been and the fact that we survived because we live here. But let's go to movie number 2 now. Ford versus Ferrari. All right, parable number 2. Now, I'm a car guy, but if you don't have to love cars to love this movie, right? It wasn't about cars. It was about American ingenuity and American spirit and grit and the idea that you can call us whatever you want, but don't ever call us down. The storyline in the movie was set in the early 60s, and it was all true, by the way. In 1963, Ford Motor Company was about to change the world by introducing the Mustang. But Ford Vice President Lee Iacocca, he felt like there was something missing. Something flashy, something fast that could win races and garner a worldwide following. So Iacocca, he convinced Ford President Henry Ford II that they ought to buy out Italian automaker Ferrari. Ferrari had been dominating the Le Mans racing circuit with hand-built streamlined classics. Well, Henry Ford liked the idea, so he sent Iacocca and a team over to Italy. And when they got there, Enzo Ferrari met with them, and then he went and sat and sipped tea in the far end of his coachworks while he made Iacocca and the others wait. Well, Iacocca made the pitch, but yeah, Ferrari let him sit and sweat for hours. All the while, it turns out, Ferrari was using Ford's offer to gain leverage with Fiat so that Fiat would buy him out for more money. It was a dirty trick. It was a bait and switch. But as if that were not enough, Ferrari decided then to insult America's premier automaker directly. He told them in a condescending tone, "You go back to Michigan. You go back to your big ugly factory making its ugly little cars, and you tell your pig-headed boss that all of his smug executives are worthless sons of whores, and tell him he's not Henry Ford." Well, in one fell swoop, that arrogant Italian, whose country we had just liberated from fascism just 20 years before that, insulted American manufacturing capability, American style, and American legacies, and he really insulted all of America in the process. And he shouldn't ought to have done that. When Ford heard about it, He decided it wasn't the first time the U.S. went to war in Europe, and he told Iacocca, we're going to bury Ferrari at Le Mans. So Iacocca got the green light to build the world's fastest, most enduring race car from scratch, but to do it he had to have a team. So in the movie you see the story about Iacocca going out and hiring none other than a guy named Carroll Shelby, a legendary car builder and a racer who at 22 years old had been flying a B-29 Superfortress on combat missions in World War II. Well, Shelby, he hired a guy named Ken Miles, a man who could drive like his hair was on fire, who could feel the road and even smell the next gear. Shelby was asked to come to the debut of the new Ford Mustang and give a short speech about what they were going to do. And he got there and he made a scene. Wearing his signature cowboy hat and talking in his Texas drawl, Shelby took the stage and he told the world how it was going to be. This is what he said. He said, quote, if my daddy was here today, he'd tell me to sit on down and leave the yakking to the college boys, so like my cars, I'll make this fast. He said, when I was 10 years old, Pop said to me, son, it's a truly lucky man who knows what he wants to do in this world, because that man will never work a day in his life. He said, but there's a few, a precious few, and hell, I don't know if they're lucky or not, but he said there's a few people who find something that they have to do, something that obsesses them, something that if they can't do it, it's going to drive them clean out of their mind. He said, I'm that guy. And I know one other man feels exactly the same. His name's Mr. Henry Ford, and together we're going to build the fastest automobile in the world, and we're going to make history too, at Le Mans. He said, my name is Carroll Shelby. I build race cars. And brother, it was on then. Shelby and Miles and the team they put together built a legendary vehicle called the GT40. It was sleek but muscular. It was low and mean and sounded like it could fly. It didn't use a high-winding European engine. It carried a bulky American-built Ford V8 engine. It was just a beast of a car. But it didn't win right away. But as Henry Ford began focusing on the checkered flag, Carroll Shelby focused on building and sustaining a true legend on four wheels. And he told Henry Ford, they may not have won right out the gate, but they scared the pants off Enzo Ferrari when the GT40 hit 218 miles per hour on the straightaway. So yeah, Ford and Ferrari continued to duke it out, and Ford began inching closer, but still not able to take the flag. At one point in the movie, the American team was struggling to keep their brakes from overheating with all the power they could put to the wheels. It's called brake fade. And it was burning their brakes out, causing massive complications. And so Shelby and Miles, they read the race rules, and they came up with an idea that only a group of maverick Americans could do. They did a pit stop, and they shocked the world because they changed out the entire brake assembly. In the pit stop, no one had ever done that before. Ferrari was apoplectic, but they were in. And as they approached the 1966 24-hour Le Mans race, Shelby had built 3 GT40s, and it was a nasty race, but in Carroll Shelby's words, we're lighter, we're faster, and if that don't work, we're nastier. And the 3 GT40s pushed by the Ferrari team, they pushed it all the way to the limits until the last Ferrari actually blew its engine trying to keep up. And the Ford team finished with all 3 GT40s taking the top 3 trophies, all at once. And Ford went on to do it again for the next 3 consecutive years. Look, I think that movie, Ford versus Ferrari, I think it has America down to a T. As a people, we're not always the most refined. We have a maverick streak a mile long. Our people can get rowdy and boisterous and speak out of turn, but we're also fiercely loyal and overly determined. It's as if losing is like antithetical to being an American. We take yes as permission to go the extra mile. We often take no as a challenge to be overcome. If they don't have what we need, we'll make it from scratch. If they don't know where it is, we'll go find it. If they say it can't be done, then by God, we'll just do it to prove that it's doable. If a friend says they need something, the culture of America means that we'll stop what we're doing and give them the shirt off our back. And if you mess with one of our friends, it's the same as if you mess with us. I believe that by and large, Americans love deeper, work harder, win more, and lose less than pretty much any country in the whole world. And we may often be brash and sometimes off color, but we're good. And I mean good as in heart, good at heart. There is nothing about America that is perfect, but pretty much everything about it is good. Carroll Shelby once said, if you're not winning, you're losing. Fair enough. Ford versus Ferrari, epic flick about an epic race in an epic car built by an epic group of men, but it's really a story about the American spirit. Think about where we've been. We held out. We held out through hard times, and we have an opportunity now to rebuild and to do things that no one thought possible with the America that we just saw being beaten on over the last few years. And in my opinion, just sitting here in my vantage point with, All of y'all out there listening, I believe the American spirit and faith and tradition, I believe it's all on the rise. So you take those two movies as an analogy. Use them as like a parable of America, of where we've just been and of where we're going. Yes, we've been beaten on, suppressed, censored, sued, canceled, fired, shut down, but we have not been beaten. Conservative values, faith, freedom, and family, the idea that liberty is bigger than any of us, that those who survived, those that believed, were doing so because they fought back, sometimes feeling like they were stuck behind enemy lines during the culture wars, but they did. And now by God, we're going to lean in hard and rebuild. It is time to press in, y'all, and fix that which was broken. To restore the walls, repair the gates, rebuild the economy, revive the military, regain the border, reach for new heights. I don't ever want to lose that which God has given us. The idea of a free America where we are aspirational and inspirational. Because like Jed said in Red Dawn, it's because we live here. Y'all, we are so back. That's my philosophy.